For the longest time, ever since starting my YouTube channel back in 2016, I've shot on different cameras, starting from my humble iPhone 6s, my only DSLR camera, which was the Nikon D5300, the Lumix G7, Sony a6300, and a6400, so on, and so on. On this basis, I've never found myself trapped in a situation where I was scared to try a new camera or system that fitted into my budget, but for my use case, to up my production quality and workflow options and also efficiency. Now cueing the Fuji X-T3. Now, at the time when the Fuji X-T3 was announced back in September 2018, I was actually on the Sony APS-C system using the Sony a6300 with lots of hacks, lots of workarounds, to get to a place where it was usable enough for my workflow and expectations. Now let's fast forward to 2020. And after the announcement and the release now of the Fuji X-T4, you can pretty much guess and pretty much say yes if you've been following me. I have sold all my Sony gear and I am planning to switch over to Fuji. But before the Fuji X-T4, let's talk about the Prelude camera before it, which is the awesome X-T3, which is what I'm shooting this section and pretty much this whole talking head section on right now. Let's talk about the X-T3 in 2020. That's what I have here with me. And since basically I'm a first-time Fuji shooter, I thought, you know what? Let me get my impression on the Fuji X mount system. Let me get my feet wet by, of course, using the Fuji X-T3. So, Ben from Lover of Tech, this is my Fuji X-T3 impressions and review after 2 weeks. Now, quick disclaimer, I personally did reach out to Fuji UK and ask them, hey, could I review and use the Fuji X-T3 since, I've sold all my Sony gear and I'm planning to switch over anyway, and honestly, the friendly guys at Fuji UK really surprised me and said, hey, we're more than happy for you to do that. They were kind enough to do that. So they sent it out to me. So I wanted to say a big thank you to Fuji UK for doing that. But with that being said, just a disclaimer, this is not sponsored in any way, shape or form. They've not paid me a dime to say anything in any way specific. They're not even seeing this video before you guys get to see it. So everyone's on the same page. And this is as much me giving you my experience straight up with nothing really influenced from them. So with that out of the way, let's get straight into it. Let's actually start with the impressions. My first impression of the Fuji X-T3 when I unboxed and held was definitely the build quality, like the weight. And it's not the weight as in it's heavy, but it's the weight in the sense that it's dense and it feels very, very premium. And it's something that honestly I shouldn't be surprised, and it shouldn't have surprised me, because for its time and even for now, this is regarded as a premium hybrid camera. But nevertheless, it did actually surprise me, and that's a level of confidence I really liked as a mental image and impression of holding a camera for the first time. But overall, the build quality from the body, and if you're looking things like the mic input, the headphone port, the USB-C, thank the USB gods we have this. That supports power delivery PD charging, dual SD card slots, and not just any SD card slots. We're talking about UHS-II speeds with both of them positioned in the correct place, on the right grip, and not in the battery slot compartment. The retro film design look definitely gives the X-T3 a swagger and a look that makes it feel unique. But don't even let this old school filmic look fool you into thinking that this camera does not pack heat, because trust me, we're gonna run through some things and it definitely does. The level of custom buttons and functions you have in the X-T3 allow you a freedom to make the camera honestly your own, and to the point where even with how I set up for myself, I barely scratched the surface of what you could do. And honestly, I personally think this is what you want from a premium body hybrid camera, so that one, you own it, two, you can grow into it over time while still having a balance of a level of ease of use to allow you to really get content out without it getting in the way. And honestly, that's a good balance, and that's very important. But before I'm praising it too much and it sounds like, hey, I'm just drinking all the Fuji juice, there are two initial feedbacks I can give during my first impressions when I had the camera. Was having a fully very angle articulating display 1, 2, a bigger battery, and at least minimum a mini, if not ideally a full-size HDMI port. As I know personally for me as a video shooter, from past experience, having these body design changes, right, it really does make a difference to how you operate and the efficiency of how you make and shoot videos, especially when it comes to the process of it. It makes it a lot easier. So those were the things that stuck out to me immediately when I saw it. And these things really come into benefit when you're in less controlled environments. Now, adding to the lovely lockable dials for the shutter speed, ISO, and obviously you've got the exposure compensation, which I feel are a lot more suited and a lot more enjoyable, and it gives you much more of a tactile experience, more towards photography, but I would say it's less beneficial to video because you don't get the finer shutter speed dial-ins that you would do rather than using it in camera settings. But overall, away from all of those things, I am overall very impressed with the build quality of the Fuji X-T3. Now, quick rundown of the specs, especially related to video because I'm more of a video shooter. The Fuji X-T3 has a 26.1 megapixel APS-C size sensor, which is a 1.5x crop versus full frame equivalent. What it does use is the Fuji X Processor 4 internally, which enables class-leading video and photo features. Now I'm gonna do this differently. I'm gonna break this down into two key categories of shooting modes for video. First one is gonna be the key frame rates and resolutions versus the specialist frame rates and resolution. Now, let me explain it. What I mean by key frame rates and resolutions are, basically, these are the shooting modes that give you no additional crop factors on top of the already APS-C crop. And usually with these key frame rates, people output these shooting modes without, not much changes to things like the speed and the duration and the final frame rate output. Whereas on the specialist frame rates and resolutions, they provide special end results to the final footage that you have more control over, such as either slow motion, super slow motion, high resolution, and high frame rate at the same time, which, allows you greater final output to looks such as things like speed, motion, but can come at a slight penalty to things like time limits and additional crops. So with that out of the way, buckle up. In all the key frame rates and resolutions, here we go. The Fuji X-T3 shoots both 4K and full high definition in DCI 17:9, with 4K up to 30 frames a second, full high definition up to 60 frames a second, both with 420 color sampling, 10-bit internal with H.265, and either all intra or long GOP compression with zero additional crop, using a full APS-C sensor readout and up to 400 megabits per second in 4K with up to 200 megabits per second in full high definition. Whew. Now let's move over to the specialist frame rates and resolutions. The Fuji X-T3 can shoot DCI 4K up to 60 frames a second, 200 megabits per second, 420 color sampling, 10-bit internal with H.265, but only in long GOP compression with a 20-minute record limit, and you do get an additional 1.18 times crop. Then you have the super slow motion mode in full high definition, 120 frames a second, with various options to conform internally in camera down to 24 frames a second, 25 frames a second, 30 frames a second, or even 60 frames a second with 420 and 10-bit internal at H.265, but only in long GOP compression, no audio recording, and a 6-minute record limit with an additional 1.29x crop factor. That's a lot of specs. Now, like I said, that's a lot of info on the resolutions and the recording modes, but I'm gonna be straight up. People say specs don't matter. Specs matter. I like specs. I'm just gonna say it with my chest high. I like specs, and I love specs, especially when a premium product not only has the specs, but also does it right, which for sure, honestly, using a Fuji X-T3, it does right. In the hybrid space, especially for APS-C, this was not only the first to do all of these features, but in a lot of ways, bar the newer XT4, which makes sense, it's still class leading. So for me, I love to see it here. I'm really impressed by it. Now, I feel the minor setbacks in the specialist modes are, to me, very minor, and it doesn't really hold you back from actually making use of it and it being usable, in my personal opinion, because I personally feel anything up to an additional 1.3x crop on your sensor already, especially when it comes to the specialist frame rates, right, and resolutions, it's more than enough and it's still usable, and it doesn't compromise your shooting and your creative options. And to have that and still have these features, I think it's really, really good what Fuji have done here. Autofocus is great on this camera. You have got 425 phase detection autofocus points with the contrast detection points as well, with support. And one of the first cameras to really do it in a hybrid camera in this category, real-time IAF and face detect tracking in video. I would say, given a bit of feedback, coming from the newer Sony cameras that I was using from before to this, you do subjectively, there's some objectivity, depends on the intensity of the autofocusing test that you do. Maybe you give up somewhere between 10 to 15% less super critical, and I'm talking about super critical autofocus performance. But for me, I would say this, I'd rather give up a little bit of autofocus. They still give you autofocus, guys, come on, right? I'd rather give that up and have all these additional features for shooting on tap to allow me more creative options any day of the week, anytime. Now, the lens I had pleasure using with the XT3 is the 18-55, which is what I'm shooting on here, f2.8 variable aperture to f4 OIS XF zoom kit lens. Honestly, to call this a kit lens is almost an insult and it's almost rude. The lens is solid in the build and feel. The optical image stabilization OIS and AF work great with the camera versus other kit lens. And honestly, with this being a kit lens against the kit lenses I've seen, this lens leaves the rest in the dust. And honestly, as an all-around starter and a long-term lens, trust me, in some cases, bar obviously the great Fuji selection of the native X mount lenses, this is a good lens to really hold you on its own. And for all the videos I've recorded, this is the only lens I've been using and it's not been a problem at all. Now let's look at the footage of the Fuji XT3. That's what we want to see, the image quality, man. And personally, I shot in H.265 10-bit internal in either 4K in DCI or 16:9 as usual, 24 frames a second, or 60 frames a second at 200 megabits per second in long GOP compression. Now the SD card that I have is the V30 speeds, UHS-I speeds, and for the shooting modes I have, it's more than enough. But Fuji does recommend that when you want to go into the higher 400 megabits per second all I codec, you do need to step up to a UHS-II card and at least a V60 speed, if not ideally a V90 speed, to give you that headroom so that it records smooth and there's no issues with corruption or struggling to write to the memory card. Fuji also has a list of different film simulations, as they call it, that give you a unique look to each. But personally, I only really ever shot in Eterna. Love the look of Eterna straight out of camera, or with a slight grade or an additional LUT that I like to use to really dial in the look I wanted, as even with Eterna out of the camera, there's still room to grade. Now, you're gonna see footage. Let's run through all the footage in all the different shooting modes. We'll do a quick autofocusing test as well. As you're running through the footage, you're gonna see it. And honestly, let me know what you guys think, man. I think the footage looks phenomenal. And I would have to say that the film simulation modes, bar a few of them, don't really seem like a negative or seem like a gimmick. They're actually quite decent if you are trying to get a quick turnaround. So have a look at the footage, man, and let me know what you think. Now I only ever touched shooting in F-Log much later down, and even here you can actually see the difference. I'm shooting in F-Log now, and then Fuji actually have an official F-Log to eternal LUT, and it grades nicely. You don't even need to touch it, or you can add a bit more to it if you want, but to have an official LUT for the eternal makes it so much easier to get the maximum dynamic range and also get the look that you want straight out of camera, and also add it to make it more personal to yourself. But word of warning, when shooting in F-Log, the minimum ISO does change to 640 versus the minimum in video of 160 on other modes like the standard Eterna or the other film simulations as well, like your Provias, your standards and your Vivid, you know. So be warned that when you are shooting in F-Log, depending on what situation you're in, yes, you need to overexpose a little bit by 1 stop or 2 stops, slightly around there, not too much, it's very manageable, but you might need a variable ND or ND to stop down to make sure you're getting the right exposure. Now, if you couldn't tell, subjectively, the colors and the image on the Fuji XT3 is the best part of it all. You know, this is honestly what Fuji are known for, their film stocks and their filmic image and the unique image that they have. And you know what, for me, for someone coming from Sony, this like, let me just take a step back and let me just be real. This honestly, right, feels like the step up, the flexibility, the upgrade that I've wanted as a video shooter, especially in this form factor, in this price range. You know, the quality and the workflow is something that I've honestly enjoyed. Honestly, this is pro level stuff in a hybrid camera, and apart from internal RAW or external RAW recording, it honestly does not get better than this for APS-C in this hybrid space. Having an option like this where, for example, the little things, you know, having the exact double the shutter speed to your frame rate, where you've got 1/48 of a shutter speed, exactly 180 degree rule, you know, same for 1/20th over 60, you know, exactly double. Whereas instead you see on other cameras is 1/50th, 1/125th. This shows that in the little details, Fuji really does care about giving you the correct look to your video. That's an attention to detail that I can definitely rock behind, and I appreciate big time. Although I wish there was an option for shutter angle so that I don't have to worry about touching my shutter speed at all in all the frame rates. But you know what, I'm gonna be very honest, at this point it's a far cry from being a major issue. It's a nicety, right? And at this point I am nitpicking, but I do have to say that this is a wish list and I wish it was there. Look, as you can see from the image quality, the strength of the internal codec and the compression with H.265, all-I, and 10-bit seriously makes the Fuji XT3, my personal opinion, this is by far the best image I've gotten out of a camera for video. I'm impressed. Like, impressed is an understatement when it comes to the footage. Like, I've loved it, no joke. And even with all of that, my final pet peeve is that unless you're recording over HDMI, which you then get the full 422 color sampling and 10-bit to something like a Atomos Ninja V recording in ProRes, there is no unlimited recording option anywhere within the camera, even in the key frame rates and the resolutions. And that's internally. And yes, I know that in more control situations like this recording, for example, right, I don't really record past 30 minutes, that's true, but it's a nice feature to have because there is certain types of content that I create on the channel and also externally, you know, where I am recording, and it's nice to have that ability to record past 30 minutes without having to restart and just worry about it. So yeah, that's a pet peeve. It's something that I think about, but when using it within this 2 weeks, it's never been something that has really hindered any of my shooting progress. Now, for all the things I've said, what are my final thoughts on the Fuji XT3? Well, the menus are not actually that bad. You know, it's something that initially you're not that used to because, again, you're used to using a different camera system, but the operation is fast and quick. And after a few days, I pretty much knew enough to get me going and making content and making videos like clockwork. And guys, you've been following the channel, man. I've been putting in work. There's been videos that's been coming out. So this XT3 has been put through its paces. I've shot a decent amount of videos with it, and I am very happy with it so far, no lies. But for me, honestly, specifically to the XT3, I think where it really shines, if I'm gonna be honest with you, it's more controlled situations like this where, you know, you're behind the camera or you're putting workarounds to fix the stuff that really needs to help the camera when you're in front of it. Like for example, without the fully vari-angle articulating screen, you do need a monitor. You definitely need a monitor to self-frame, self-see, see what's going on, have the HDMI info come into it, unless it's an external recorder, but if it's a monitor so you can see the settings as you're operating it from the back. A charging solution. Now obviously, like I said, the great thing is this camera does support power delivery, and the power delivery standard over USB-C is great, and that's what I've been using to pretty much keep the camera charged and slow drain while doing these recordings, because the internal battery and the battery capacity, honestly, it does leave much to be desired. It's not that great. For video, it's just not that great. Another thing you do need to consider is there's no IBIS with the in-body image stabilization. So when you're picking your lenses specifically for the XT3 in more run and gun situation, as many lenses with OIS, the optical image stabilization, consider it, because that's gonna help because of the fact that there's no IBIS, tripod, or more OIS lenses when you're selecting. Now with that being said, the Fuji XT4 does fix all those problems, so you know that's why I want to get it, and that's a good thing that Fuji listens and they've addressed it. But for someone like me, right, deciding where this XT3 sits, am I still gonna get it? Yeah, I'm getting it as an additional camera when I get my XT4 as a priority, and that's gonna be my A cam to B cam roll-off use. Honestly, for all the shortcomings and feedback on this camera, for myself, me personally, coming from a Sony APS-C system for video, right, there's no contest to what Fuji have done. And with what they've done and also what they're doing with their X-mount system, the growth, the accessibility that's opening up, I legit have no regrets moving from Sony to the X-mount system. No, not perfect. I mean, what system is perfect? But let's be honest, that's something that is always going to be a give and take. But Fuji have won me. They have actually won me because they've proven that they listen, they support their systems, and they're willing to push boundaries, set the bar higher so that the industry moves forward in this price bracket. And in all that says, with the Fuji XT3 for what it is, especially for the price that you can get it now, brand new and used, it's a no-brainer. It's a complete no-brainer, and I'm definitely adding it to my arsenal next to my XT4. It's worth it in 2020, so long as you know the workarounds and you can get a good price for it. Whew, that was a lot, man, but you know what? I've enjoyed time with this XT3, and I'm glad I've been able to share my experience with you. Yes, there's a lot more that can always been going through, but this is something that I've enjoyed using over the time. And let me know what you guys think. Any XT3 users out there, what's been your experience of it since now into 2020? Are you still using it? Are you planning on upgrading to the XT4? Are you planning on getting it alongside the XT4 like I'm planning to do? Let me know. Let's have a discussion in the comment section below. And again, if you enjoy content like this, you know what to do. Ben from Lover of Tech, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you're part of Team TLS, the Tech Lover Squad, so you don't miss content like this in the future. Make sure you like, share, and you stay subscribed. I hope you're all safe during this time. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.